These things still amaze
Good morning. Today's date is May 25th, 2006. My name is Richard Nicholas, and today I'm conducting an oral history interview with Robert Shindler. This interview is being held at the Dalton Community Television Studio in Dalton, Massachusetts, in association with the Dalton Council on Aging. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Would you please state your full name, and would you spell your last name?
Okay, it's Robert G. for Gordon Shindler, Shindler.
And where do you presently live, Bob?
I live in Pittsfield, Mass, and have been there for since 1937, so that's what, 59 years, 69 years.
And could you give me your date of birth and where you were born?
Yeah, I was born November 3rd, 1925, in Dorchester, Massachusetts.
Did you grow up and go to school there?
No, I moved to Pittsfield. My family moved to Pittsfield, really, when I was 9 years old, 1935.
And what was life like in Pittsfield at that time?
Well, I think it was a lot different here. We always played outside. And I was thinking the other day, my mother always had to say, make sure your knees are clean when you take a bath. And I look back, we probably only took a bath once a week, so the knees did get dirty.
Right.
They don't now.
And how about the Depression? Did that affect your family?
When we lived in Boston, I can remember my dad having 2 jobs. And I can remember getting gifts from at Christmas time. And we don't observe Christmas, but my parents must have put our names in and we got some toys. Oh. But then we moved to Pittsfield, and then it was back to 1 job.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I have 2 younger brothers.
Okay. And what'd your dad do for a living when you moved to Pittsfield?
When we moved to Pittsfield, he worked for Car Hardware for a year or a year and a half, and then he bought a gas station on the west end of Pittsfield. And we had that from 1936 to 1959.
Mm-hmm. Did you graduate from high school?
Yeah, I graduated from Pittsfield High School in 1942, for first class after the war started.
And what did you do after you finished school? How old were you at this time?
I was 16 when I graduated from high school.
So what did you do when you finished school?
Well, I was still 16. I went to try to get into the Navy, and because of a bad eye, I got turned down. So I went to work at the GE as a messenger boy, and a month or 2 later, I decided I ought to be in the service. Everybody was going. So I went up to the draft board and told them I was 18 years old. Nobody questioned it. In fact, I wasn't the youngest man in my platoon.
So you were actually drafted at 17?
At 17, right.
And where were you inducted?
Out of Pittsfield, Mass. We went to Springfield for our exams and came home for a week and then went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Uh-huh. And there was something unusual about that group that was inducted, right?
Well, the unusual thing, 41 of us were drafted that same day. 33 of us went into the same battalion.
And what were your dates of service, Bob?
I entered the service on March 17th, 1943, and I was discharged on January 8th, 1946.
And could you tell me where you were sent for basic training?
Basic training was in Camp Davis, North Carolina. We formed a new battalion of anti-aircraft.
Mm-hmm. And can you describe Camp Davis a little bit?
Well, to me, it was new to even be away from home because the furthest we'd ever been was New York to visit some grandparents. But every battalion had a full block area, and we were spread out around it. There were obstacle courses in the middle, which we had to go over every day or 2 just to strengthen ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't too far from a town called Carolina Beach, so at night you could get a ride in.
Just relax a little bit.
Yeah, well, forget what you did during the day.
Right. Now, you were assigned to a particular battalion here?
Yeah. We formed the 776 Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion.
And was there a special name for this?
Yeah, we called ourselves the Liberty Bell Battalion. Through no help of me, I guess the officers, when they first formed it, decided that's the name it should be because of 776.
I see. And were the personnel in this battalion from all over the country, or?
Well, there were about 700 of us were from New England, and most of our cadre, and the cadre were the non-commissioned officers, and the officers came from all over the country. Mm-hmm. Very diverse group.
And Could you describe some of your training here at Camp Davis?
Well, there was a lot of hiking. There was a lot of going over the obstacle course. And of course, we had to spend time learning our rifle nomenclature, the 40 millimeter gun and the machine gun. We had to learn how to take it apart and put it back together pretty quickly just in case we needed it.
Mm-hmm. And from Camp Davis, did you go somewhere else for more intensive training?
Yeah, they sent us to Fort Fisher, North Carolina, which was about 40 miles from there, but it was right on the ocean. Mm-hmm. And there, almost every day, we would fire our guns at a tow target over the ocean. And sometimes I felt sorry for the pilot as we could see the flares going on the left-hand side of the tow target instead of the right-hand side. Wow. Or hitting it.
And what were the dates you were there, Bob? Do you remember?
We were there. It was nice. It was June, July, and August, which is nice hot months. And our little huts in which we lived in units of 15 men were probably 50 yards from the ocean. So you can get into the ocean anytime you want. In fact, we probably went swimming a lot of mornings before we had our breakfast.
I see. Now, you mentioned 40 millimeter guns and machine guns. Can you describe what these
Well, the 40 millimeter gun took one shell at a time. It needed 4 men to operate it. One to move the gun around by hand, and then 2 men, one on each side, to either lift the gun or sway it, and 1 man to load the ammunition. Actually, you needed a man to hand them the ammunition, so that would be 5. Mm-hmm. The machine gun was a water-cooled machine gun in which you rested your back on an arm. And we didn't have, they call it water-cooled, but I never saw where the water was.
And what caliber were these?
That was a 50 caliber gun.
50 caliber. Now, how many men were assigned to these gun sections?
Well, each gun section had 15 men, mm-hmm. a sergeant, 3 corporals, and the rest of us were privates or private first class. We all had duties. And one of the things about our gun section, and I'm not familiar with the others, that starting in probably June when we went to Fort Fisher, 13 or 14 of us were with the gun section the rest of our time in service.
Mm-hmm. With the same section?
Same section. We learned to work together. In fact, one of the things we mentioned overseas was that all of us, no matter where we were, if there was any action, could take any position on the guns, including the machine gun.
Right. And what was your particular duty within the gun section?
Well, I was a machine gunner.
On the 50 caliber?
On a 50 caliber. When we got overseas, we had issued to us an M51, which was on a trailer, and you sat in a turret, and had 4 barrels. And the 50 caliber machine gun could fire 600 rounds a minute, so that if we could aim at a plane, there was a lot of flak going up. And it took 3 of us to take care of it, because 1 man would be sitting in the turret, and the other 2 would have to load the ammunition.
I see. And these were strictly anti-aircraft?
Anti-aircraft. Well, we called ourselves anti-tank. Unfortunately, we didn't have to use it for that.
Right. I see. And was there a particular difficult phase of this training?
Tell you, because I was 17 when I went in the service, I had never really shaved, maybe once a month or something like that. And on the first inspection, I got gigged because I had a little growth on my sides there. So I have to shave every Friday night from then on. And then once you start shaving, you got to do it twice a week, and then 3 times a week, and then every day.
I see.
But the obstacle course was kind of tough. These are things that, we played football and baseball and things as kids, but we never went over obstacle courses. So you had to learn to climb a rope, climb a tower, jump down on the other side, move your feet through tires like the football players do for practice.
And was there a particularly long hike, too, that you had to?
Well, the second week we were in North Carolina, they put us on a 25-mile hike with a full pack. I feel pretty good that I finished that hike, but a lot of men had to drop out.
That's quite a distance.
And they had a medic wagon to pick them up.
And did you find it hard to adjust to this military life in the beginning?
Not really. They fed us steadily, which I thought was great. But I'd been in the Boy Scouts, so I'd slept in tents and knew how to start a fire. And roughed it a little bit so that it really didn't faze me.
Okay. And did you get a furlough while you were at Camp Fisher?
Yeah, from Fort Fisher in July, we finished some basic training with the guns, and half of us were allowed to go home. In fact, being down there was pretty tough. We got to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and there were a lot of soldiers waiting to go home, and everybody else. My buddy and I climbed in a car window to make it.
On the train?
On the train.
And that was in August of?
That was July or August.
July, I'm sorry, okay. And when you returned from your furlough, did you go back to Camp Fisher?
Yeah, we stayed at Camp Fisher a while, but you know, we had to wait in New York for a couple hours for our train, and when I went to the USO there, now this is 1943, and they had a TV set there. So I tell people that I saw TV in 43, and they say, how could you? Well, they had it. It wasn't a good picture, but we were able to look at it.
Able to look at it.
And we went back to Fort Fisher for a few more weeks, then we headed back to Camp Davis. And from Camp Davis, we headed to Blackstone Air Force Base for some winter maneuvers.
Mm-hmm. And this was an Air Force base?
Yeah.
And what was your training here? Was it more advanced?
Well, we slept in tents, which we hadn't done before. We had to do some cooking for ourselves, and we had to dig latrines. We had outdoor plumbing, you know, things like that. No hot and cold running water. But it was good training because 44, 45 was one of the worst winters in Europe, and we were living in tents then too.
And how was the weather down there at that time?
November, December were pretty cold in Virginia.
I see. And was this training coordinated with other branches of the service too?
Yeah, there were some maneuvers involved, and as a private, I really didn't have a lot of knowledge about what went on, but I know they said you got to do this on time and be here on time. So somebody was getting points, not us.
Right. Now, after all these months of training, did you feel that we'd soon be leaving, going overseas?
Oh, yeah. We went to the rifle range quite a few times. They wanted everybody to be an expert marksman. And we found that most of us did get to shoot the gun, the rifle was an M1, very well.
Oh, good. Now, after being at Camp Blackstone, where did you go next?
We went up to Fort Edwards. Camp Edwards? Yeah, Camp Edwards on the Cape. Mm-hmm. And we went up there in January, and it was warmer there in Camp Edwards, Massachusetts than it was in Virginia. And you'd think it'd be the other way around, but it was warmer, and we appreciated it, and then we were close to home.
Right. This was in January of 44?
44.
Now, were you able to get home from?
Yeah. Got home for a 10-day furlough while we were there. We did some training there, shooting our guns again over the ocean at the tow targets. Got a 10-day furlough, and I think we knew then that it wouldn't be long before we'd go overseas.
Just to be curious, these tow targets, how far were they behind the plane that you were shooting?
You know, I'm not good at judging distance, but it had to be pretty far or the pilots wouldn't fly them. Because in our battalion, we had 32 40-millimeter guns. We didn't use the machine guns to fight at the target, just shoot at the target, just the 40-millimeter. And we were spread out in the distance, so when one started, anyway, I wouldn't want to be the pilot.
Right. From Camp Edwards, where did you go?
Then we went to Camp Miles Standish, and that's where we got our final shots. We went through an obstacle course. We had to go through a gas chamber to see if our gas masks were okay. In fact, with the gas masks, once when we were in Europe, there was a gas alert, and we had I guess that was August of 44, we had to wear our gas masks for about 4 hours until they said there was nothing there. And it was just a false alarm, and we were lucky.
But you had training on how to do that.
Yep.
And you said Camp Miles Standish. Where is that, Bob?
That's in Massachusetts also.
I see. And when did you board ship for embarkation?
We left out of Boston Harbor. It was February 27th, 44. And the ship sailed on February 28th.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the name of the ship?
SSS Brinquin. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but it was a converted Puerto Rican liner, and that was quite an experience. We had to sleep on hammocks 6 high, and I was number 5. and you had to be careful climbing up or down.
I would
You
think.
were always waking somebody or kicking on them or stepping on them, but
How many-
we survived it.
How many troops do you think were on board?
Well, our battalion had 900 men, and there was a medical detachment with 300 or 400. It wasn't a big ship, and we were lucky. They did the KP, and we did the guard duty.
I see. Now, being a young man and leaving the United States, going overseas, what were your feelings at this time when you left?
Well, all the time, I thought that the minute you got overseas, you'd be shooting at somebody, and found out that it was different.
But you weren't apprehensive when...
No, I don't think very many men were. Or we had a man go AWOL. Why he went AWOL, I don't know, but he didn't get on the boat with us. But I think once you climbed on the boat, you knew what you were doing there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were well trained for whatever we had to see in the future.
Right. And what were conditions like aboard this ship?
There wasn't much to do. There was so many troops, and it wasn't that big a ship that you played cards a lot. Can't remember if we had radios going or not, or if they played music, but there were a lot of card games and things like that. And walking around the deck, you do that 100 times a day, just for exercise.
Now, how long did it take most of these guys to get their sea legs? Because I'm sure
I'm sure that, I know I was seasick the first day or two, and I would say that probably a good share of them, most of them, like myself, had never been on a large ship, never been on the ocean, you know, so it was different. And this is February, the ocean was pretty tough, and there was a lot of rocking. But after the second or third day, I think that I didn't miss a meal.
And where did you finally land?
We landed in Scotland, and I think that was March 8th or 9th. It was a nice trip. None of the ships in my convoy that I know of got hit by the German submarines, but by 44, the Navy had things pretty well under control.
As far as the German submarine?
Yeah.
And where did you go from Scotland? You didn't stay there?
Scotland, no. We left there, went to a small camp of some kind, and we were in barracks there, which was pretty nice. We had picked up our guns, had to clean them because they were full of cosmoline. But the first night there, the Germans raided a town short distance from there, and we could hear the shooting from the anti-aircraft guns and see the explosions of the bombs that the Germans dropped.
And this was in England now, is
This
that right?
was in England already, yeah.
And what was your reason for being there at Camp Landmartin?
To pick up all our guns, clean them, and get ready for whatever they assigned us.
Okay, and after your battalion was outfitted, where did you go?
We went down to Falmouth Harbor, which was in southern England, and we set our guns up all around the harbor to protect the ships that were coming in and leaving.
Mm-hmm. And was this a staging area, Falmouth?
Oh yeah, we saw this. There wasn't much activity until May, and then by May, everybody in England that was quarantined. You couldn't leave your gun section. And then we could see the ships coming in with a lot of supplies. Well, the ships were always coming in with supplies. And we saw, right after Memorial Day, we saw the ships leave, and they were loaded with soldiers. Mm-hmm. So we knew something was going to happen.
And your mission there was to protect the harbor from enemy aircraft. And when did the battalion first engage German planes?
Well, you know, since you and I were talking, it reminded me, at the time, I don't know how the time went by so fast, and we were busy all the time. But I look back, we never fired our guns once all the time we were in England. And the only time the Germans came over was May 30th. About 30 planes came over. They hit a gas dump on the other end of the harbor, and we weren't allowed to fire our guns because there were so many ships in the harbor.
I see. Now, after the invasion force left for Normandy, which would have been in June, did your section move again?
Yeah, in fact, the battalion had 32 40-millimeter guns, and most of us were around Falmouth Harbor. And then after the invasion, because they had taken so many anti-aircraft outfits, they spread us out, and they probably left about 15 guns around Falmouth. And my section went over to guard an ammo dump. We brought 4 guns with us. I didn't even know it was an ammo dump. It was just a big hill, but that's what they told us.
Now, eventually, you were notified that you were going to be leaving for France. Do you remember where and when you boarded ship?
We boarded ship at Falmouth, and we were only given a day's notice. In fact, one of the other fellows and I had gone on past the night before, went to a dance. I don't even know the name of the town. And dance got over late, so we went to a bed and breakfast. And after sleeping on the ground all those times, or in tents, the mattress had to be that thick. We overslept. The lady fed us breakfast, and we went back to our gun section. And we got there in time. They had taken all our stuff, and they were all packed, ready to go to the harbor.
They were ready to leave.
Yeah, and if an hour later, we might not have met up with them, but I'm sure the MPs would have picked us up and told us where to go.
Right. Do you remember the name of the ship that you left on to go to France?
I really don't. I don't.
Okay.
It wasn't very clean. It was dirty, but I imagine that by the time we were using it, it had gone back and forth many times,
right.
and hauling troops one way and probably injured men back or wounded men back the other
Right.
way.
They were shuttling back and forth
I'm
across
sure.
the channel.
Yeah.
And what was your destination in France?
We went to Omaha Beach. We were there. The waves were very bad. The men were allowed to get off, but we couldn't take our guns off. So we had to be there a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was quite an experience also. At night, a lone German plane would come over and just shoot. I don't know whether they ever hit anybody. They never hit anybody in my battery, but just to keep everybody awake and alert.
Harassment.
Yeah, harassment is a good word.
And can you describe how your ships were unloaded? What was...
They had these big flat boats, you know. Got to give the Army and the Navy credit, beyond my imagination, the equipment they had there. And each boat had a crane to lift these things off and put it on the flat boat. And not all of us were needed to load it, so just a few men went.
And were you one of the first to go ashore?
Yeah.
And when did that happen?
Oh, that was in July of '44.
Okay, now before your section was set up, you described earlier to me off camera that there was a memorable incident at St Lowe. Can you describe that?
Well, being in southern England, we never saw any group of planes. Most of the American and British planes were north because they were closer to France. So we hadn't been in France long, and St Lowe was holding up the Army. And 2 days in a row, the Air Force sent over 1,000 planes. And as I said before, we were in southern England, so we didn't see any of that thing, but it was quite a sight to see.
I would think. This is because of German resistance there?
Yeah, in fact, a week or so later, we went through St. Lowe up to another site, and we moved a couple of dozen times while we were there. It was just St. Lowe had very few houses standing up, so they did a good job bombing them.
Imagine. And where did your battalion finally set up their guns for the first time?
Well, the first time we were around a P-47 Air Force Base, and the engineers had repaired one that the Germans had. We had my battery, at that time we were in battery formation, my battery had 16 guns all around. Mm-hmm. And when I say 16 guns, there were 8 40 millimeters and 8 machine guns.
I see. And around this time, did the battalion shoot down its first German plane?
Yeah. One of the machine guns, similar to mine, the M51, shot down a Ju-88. He came right at him, and the guy couldn't miss him. And that was exciting to the rest of us.
I would think. And can you describe your first few weeks in France?
Very hot. One of the nice things that we had is that up until then we had powdered food. And the French farmers in the area had a lot of eggs, and we could trade a pack of cigarettes for a dozen eggs. We know now that eggs aren't that great for you, but we had a number 10 can boiling all the time to keep the eggs going.
I see.
Nice to have fresh eggs.
I would think. And when did you leave the Normandy area?
We went down to Brittany to guard an airfield there. It was a town called Vannes. And we took over a German airfield there. The engineers were already repairing the field when we went in. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when we moved, we could hear the shooting down the road. from the infantry. So the engineers had a worse job than we did. They had to
Right.
go in while the infantry was probably still there.
I see. And how about, this was the first town you were really near. What type of reception did you receive from the French people?
Well, whenever we went through a town, the French people were always glad to see us. They'd be on the side of the road, the kids especially. It didn't take long for the kids to learn that the Americans had candy and gum, and we passed it out to them or threw it off the truck.
And what type of an airfield was this at Van? Was it a German airfield prior to your
Yeah, it was a
occupation?
German airfield. The engineers went in to fix a lot of the holes that the American planes had dropped bombs on.
And here you suffered an accident, didn't you?
Yeah, it was unfortunate. When the Germans broke out of vans, they grabbed a bunch of us to guard the roads. And I got on the truck, one of the first men on the truck, and then I was supposed to be the first man off, and I didn't know that. So I had to climb over the side of the truck, and I handed one of the men my rifle. And as I got to the top of the truck, he lifted it up, jabbed me right here. And, you know, I was young. I said, you know what? I said, and I'm trying to think of the word, you splintered my rifle, because I felt splinters, and I didn't know it was my teeth. I thought it was the rifle.
Wow.
You know. But anyway, the other fellow and I dug our foxholes, one on each side of the road, and we were supposed to be alert. We were going to be there a few days. We had enough supplies for it. And the next thing I knew, the man was shaking me and saying, Schindler, did you sleep all night? And I said, I wouldn't sleep on guard duty. Then he said, what's the matter with your face? It was all bloody from the blow that I got. And my cheek, I must have dug the foxhole young enough to dig it, get into it, but the minute I relaxed, I must have fallen asleep.
Right.
Probably the only man in my company that slept all night that night.
For good reason.
Yeah. I'm lucky the Germans didn't come along.
Right.
Yeah.
And by September, had German air activity kind of been shut down in this area now?
Yeah. The Germans, as they retreated, were probably waiting for the bulge or, you know, supplying, but we didn't fire our guns very often.
And where did you go then?
Then we left there, and Paris had already been liberated. And our battery went through Paris probably 3 days after it was liberated. And that was quite a sight.
What was the scene there?
Yeah, if you thought the small towns were cheering us, you should have been there.
It was been great. Around this time, did a member of your battery, B battery, receive an award?
Yeah. Just prior to going through Paris, P-47 came in for a landing and crash landed. And one of our men in our headquarters section happened to be near there. And the plane was burning, but he jumped right over and pulled the pilot out. And
Saved
it
his
exploded right after he got the pilot out. He
saved
got a
his life.
medal for that, yeah.
And in October, what was the weather like now in France?
It was starting to get cold. I'll show you a picture later of June or July and August where it was very hot. And this is a story I forgot to tell you. It was so hot that we said, gee, do you think if we cut our hair, it'd be cooler for us? And 13 of the 15 of us got baldies.
Was it cooler?
No, can't say that it was. It sounded good.
Right. Now, was it rainy also at this time?
No, the rain came in November and December,
Uh-huh.
just before the bulge. Things were muddy. It was hard to pull the guns and move them. Trucks were getting stuck.
Right. Okay, in the middle of October, did you move again?
Yeah, we moved many times over there. I don't even remember many of the sites.
Okay.
But we, as the American Army went forward, the engineers would either build an airfield or repair it, and then it was up to us to put our guns around the airfield.
I see.
But we also, at the same time, guarded a railroad bridges. There was a major hospital that some of our guns were around, and there was a big railroad yard in Thionville, France, that some of our guns were around.
I see. Now, at this time, you were under operational control of the Air Force, is that
We
right?
were attached to the 9th Air Force.
Uh-huh. And around this time, did that change?
Yeah, when Patton came along, we were assigned to the 3rd Army.
I see. And what were your activities in the Third Army area now, in October and November?
Well, it was the same as before. We were protecting the airfields. We'd watch the American planes go off, and we just hoped that the German planes could come in so we could shoot at them.
Right. But weren't there a couple of Germans captured?
Yeah, one of the, in fact, it was a man from Pittsfield, Dick Bolander, who many people might recognize. He worked for WBEC for a time after the war. Some Frenchmen came over to their gun section and said that there were two men over there in civilian clothes that he knows are Germans, and they went over and captured them.
I see. Now, in December, when the Germans launched their drive into the Ardennes, which became the Battle of the Bulge, did German air activity increase in your area too?
Yeah. In fact, unfortunately, that time we did shoot down some German planes, but we also shot down an American plane which came over, not our airfield, but one of the airfields where they weren't told that there was an American plane in the vicinity. Mm-hmm. And he came in very slow. He had been damaged by German flak and came in trying to find a place to land. The battery that was there had shot down two German planes earlier that evening. So when he came in, they had no warning that it was an American plane. It was at night. There was no identification.
Unfortunate.
Two men were killed.
Now, around this time, didn't you lose a close friend also?
Yeah. Christmas Day '44, the man that was doing our cooking on our gun section had met some distant relatives in Verdun and asked me if I would cook so he could spend Christmas Day with them. This is the time of the Bulge. Unfortunately for him, the truck he hitched a ride in was strafed by the Germans, blew up, and he was killed. And I had to cook for a month or two. It wasn't a pleasant job.
No, I wouldn't think. After the German offensive had failed, did enemy air activity cease in your area then?
It slowed down quite a bit. Yeah.
But weren't there some reports of a new type of plane?
Oh, that's when the jets started coming in. And our guns weren't, they tried to synchronize our guns to make up for the speed, but we couldn't do it. And none of them came over our area. They were aiming mostly for the big cities and the ports and England.
Right. And now to replace casualties on in the infantry units, did you lose some men in your battalion?
Yeah, there were 50, 60, or 70 men were taken out of the battalion. Most volunteered to go. Mm-hmm. And they were sent for infantry training, then ended up in infantry outfits. And then we got some replacements. There were men in anti-aircraft units that were wounded earlier, not serious enough to go back to England or back to the States, and they used them as replacements.
I see.
But there was little German air activity so that we could do a good job.
Now, can you describe the battalion's activities from January to April '45? Things were moving faster then, weren't they?
Yeah, we probably moved more often then than we did in the 6 months before that. And it was always going into Germany, heading that way.
Now, moving around so much, what was the mail situation?
That was pretty tough. I don't know why they did it to us, but they changed our APO number a couple of times. So my folks were sending mail to one APO, and of course they had the post office department. It wasn't post office, it was Army personnel running the post office. And they had to forward it. So some days we'd get 5 or 10 letters, and then we'd go weeks without any mail.
Now, did you sense at this time that the war was kind of winding down?
Yeah, as we moved more often into Germany, and if we were moving, it meant the infantry was moving, and the engineers were moving, so we just followed behind.
Mm-hmm. And when did your battalion enter Germany? Do you remember?
It was in April. The first platoon entered about April of '45.
And where was that at, do you know?
That was guarding some bridges on some of the smaller rivers.
Mm-hmm. And when the war finally ended, where was your battery?
My platoon was guarding 2 pontoon bridges over the Rhine River. There was a little town named Gurnsheim nearby. And yeah, I guess that's it. There were 2 pontoon bridges. We didn't see any action there. There were very no German planes, I could say.
Right.
It was kind of boring to sit there and wait.
Uh-huh. And this is where you were on VE Day?
VE Day, we were there. It was an exciting day. We hadn't fired our guns in a while, so we were firing the machine guns and the rifles into the air. A lot of excitement.
I would think.
Real good day.
And after the war ended, what were your activities in Germany? Where were you?
They moved us, my battalion, to Munich, Germany. And that was a nice area because the Red Cross had a building in Munich. Not that we can get there every day. We put our guns around an airfield there. And we started taking basic training to go to the Pacific.
And now, during the war, how many casualties did your battalion suffer?
We had 5 casualties. In fact, the first man was Bob Kelly from Pittsfield, and we'd grown up together on the west end of Pittsfield. Another man was killed at Metz, and one man was in a Jeep that turned over. He was a chaplain's assistant. We also lost the man I told you about in my gun section, and unfortunately, one of the men in our battalion drowned in the Rhine River on May 9th, the day after the war ended. Mm. And I never knew his name. He was from Connecticut, but that had to be sad for his family.
I would think, with the war being over. Now, when did you leave Europe to come back to the United States?
We must have left Europe about December 1st. I think days ran into each other, but I know I landed in Virginia, or a ship, I shouldn't say. You know, it's different those days. Every place you went by boat.
Right.
Landed in Virginia on December 10th. We were there a couple of days, and that was a pretty nice time. The band greeted us when we got off the boat, and they gave us all the steak and chicken we wanted to eat.
Oh, great. But you still had some medical problems, is that correct?
Yeah, because of that accident in Vans, I had to go to a field hospital and they pulled a tooth that the nerve was exposed. So I decided that I'd let the Army put in a tooth for me. And I was at Fort Devens almost 3 weeks getting that done. And they did a good job. It lasted me a long time.
Very good. Now, in December also, you went home for a special occasion, right?
Yeah, I got to Fort Devens on the 15th of December, and one of the men from my battery that was waiting for dental work to be done told me that we can go on and pass because they don't do anything on Sunday. And Sunday, December 16th, was my parents' 20th wedding anniversary. So I got home for that.
Right.
That was nice, yeah.
That must have been nice for them,
They
too.
were excited, yeah.
I would think. Now, did you have to go back to Devens then for more treatment too?
Yeah, that Monday they looked at me, made some impressions, and then they gave me 4 or 5 days off. Mm-hmm. And then I went back and they did something else to fit it. 3 weeks altogether.
Altogether?
Yeah.
And then were you discharged from Devens?
From Devens, yeah, on January 8th of 46.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you got home, did you go back to work or back to school, or what did you do?
I had worked at the GE, and they went on strike on January 6th. I went and filed. Then I decided that I ought to go back to school. I had written to a couple of colleges, and I got accepted to Indiana University and U of M. So I went back to high school in the mornings to refresh my memory on some of the classes, mm-hmm. and then I took, my dad still had the gas station, so I stayed at the gas station afternoons.
And worked and went to school in the daytime?
In the morning, yeah.
In the morning. Now, you didn't take advantage of the GI Bill, though, after this?
Well, I collected $20 a week for 15 weeks.
No, I meant as far as school?
No, I didn't, because I didn't go to college. My uncle, who had been a chef before the war and was a chef in the Air Force down in Miami, Florida, always wanted to buy a restaurant, so he asked me if I would go in with him. He couldn't run it himself. And we bought a small restaurant on Eagle Street called Snug Harbor. Later, we had to move a little further down the street, and we opened up the press box. And I was there till 1959. We made a nice living, met a lot of nice people.
Right. Now, did you marry at this time, too?
Yeah, I got married in 1948 to my wife, Elaine. And we have 2 children. Marty was born in 1949. Lori was born in 1958.
And how about some grandchildren?
Yeah, at the present time we have 4 grandchildren. I'm waiting for the day we might have great-grandchildren, because all the grandchildren are old enough.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, did you keep in touch with any of your buddies and attend reunions?
Yeah. In 1956, a couple from Connecticut came up to visit Elaine and I, and we talked about having a reunion. So between us, we decided that we would invite wives and children instead of just having the men. And we wrote letters to 50 men that lived within 50 miles of Waterbury, Connecticut, or 60 miles. And we had 18 men show up with a lot of wives and a lot of kids. And from then on, we've had a reunion every year since then.
Every year?
We had 10 of them in Pittsfield.
Wow.
And that was nice.
I guess.
I probably have seen at least half the men in my platoon because of the reunions. Mm-hmm. And we have another one coming up in June. We go up to Troy, New Hampshire now.
Uh-huh.
And it's a nice area up there. We have a nice weekend.
And do you still correspond by email and so forth with the...
Well, that's a good thing. My sergeant was from Arkansas, and because he had been in the service prior to us going in, he had extra points, so he left right away. Always got a Christmas card from him. And he died in the early 90s, and his wife continued sending the Christmas card. And one day she dropped me a note. Her grandson was 16 and had never talked to his grandfather about his war stories. Would I write to him? And I still do. Mm-hmm. Those days it was by snail mail. Today it's by email.
Right.
And he's in his 3rd or 4th year of college now.
Must be great for him.
Yeah.
Great. Now, how about veterans organizations? Did you join any?
Yeah, when I got out, I joined the American Legion, very active in that, and I joined the Jewish War Veterans. And I'm a 61-year member to both of them now.
Mm-hmm. And you also received an award as part of those...
Well, in 2004, I was in Pittsfield, the Veteran of the Year. I was pretty proud that I got elected to that. Yeah. And part of it is my recruiting. I've increased the membership in our Jewish War Vet post from 39 in 1992 when I took over as commander, and we're up about 140 members now.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Now, out of the 33 that in your battalion from Pittsfield,
yeah.
How many are left, Bob?
Probably 8 or 9 of us. I'm not quite sure of one of the men. All of them stayed in Pittsfield, mm-hmm. So that there's a few that are out of town I might have missed an obituary or lost contact with.
I see. Now I got a question. It's kind of important. Do you feel that your service experience had a positive or a negative effect on the rest of your life?
Oh, positive. I was always proud of my service. Always proud of the fact that I fought. I tell a lot of people, some say to me, I never went overseas. I said, well, every job was important, no matter what it was. If the war had gone 2 years longer or a year longer, you'd have gone overseas.
Right.
They needed the replacements to take care of the casualties. But I was always proud of my service.
Well, you should be.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand we have some photos to show now, so why don't we take a break and do that?
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Okay, Bob, I understand our photographs are here. Now, would you explain what they are?
Yeah, this is a picture of me sitting on the machine gun. Now, that isn't the way we fired the machine gun, but I wanted to pose for that. And that was taken in England, and you could see 2 of our 4 machine guns in that picture. And after we got to France, and I went back and told you earlier, we lived in tents from the time we got to England till the war ended, so we didn't have hot and cold running water. So that's me washing myself down, and I did have some pants on. Yeah, I did. This picture here is as the war ended, and this was put up before that, our captain was very proud of himself, and this says, "You are now crossing the Rhine River under the protection of 776 AAA Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion," and it names my captain and the captain of C. And this picture helped me file my claim for dental work with the VA. They had no records of my being in a hospital to have my tooth pulled. I went in, had the tooth pulled, went back to action. And when we got attached to the 3rd Army, Patton always said that everybody had to have a full cartridge belt and wear a steel helmet. Now that was impossible if you were cooking, but anyway, I posed that way in case he ever asked me. And then we have here, somebody in our battalion wrote a history of everything that we did from the day we started basic training. And it's a very thorough book. And here's the Liberty Bell, because we were the Liberty Bell Battalion. Over here, this picture here was taken in May of '45 after the war ended. And Jimmy Grote and Jerry Roy were both from Pittsfield. They were in the 1st platoon of my battery. We didn't see each other after we got to France because of the way we were moving and spread out. And in '93, I happened to see Mary Jane Titchener and told her the story about finding the picture. And she arranged for the 3 of us to have our pictures taken, and we're in the same order. Jerry Roy, who lived in Stockbridge for a while, Jimmy Grote lived in Pittsfield, and myself. And it's a nice write-up. I'm going to frame it one day. And in 2004, I was honored by the veterans of Pittsfield, and I was named a Veteran of the Year for Pittsfield. And I really appreciated that honor.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come here this morning.
Oh, I was glad to do it. I really was. I'm proud of my time in service.
Well, you should be, and for sharing your very interesting experiences with us. And I want to thank you also for your sacrifices and, you know, the service you gave to our country. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Dick. Glad to do it. Proud of it.